Hello. I can recall with vivid detail the last time I shat pants. I'm able to do so not by means of some freak savant-like memory of my childhood, but because the episode that arose from my incontinence on that fateful night has since left a deep, permanent imprint upon my being. It is both a story of perseverance in the face of nightmarish adversity, and as you will soon understand, a cautionary tale of a man driven to madness and subsequent religious rediscovery. Allow me to set the scene. I was 21 years old at the time. It was spring break 2011, and I was in the middle of my semester of studying abroad in London. I had decided that I wanted to see Italy, and so I elected to tag along with a handful of broads from my program who had already pieced together their own itinerary for an Italian trip. I soon realized that I had made a grave mistake in choosing my travel companions upon our arrival in Venice. Our first stop, where one suggested that we take a cab to our hotel rather than walk. Picture Venice with its network of canals and narrow footbridges in your mind's eye. And then let the absurdity of that comment sink in for a moment. Such was the perplexity with which I still regard my fellow travelers from that trip. I digress. At any rate, the details surrounding our journey are mostly irrelevant. Other than that, you should know that one night we eventually visited a tiny town in a remote area, accessible from our hotel exclusively by train. Also worth noting is the fact that the weather in Italy sucks during the spring. In a cold, steady rain that had persisted all day, we stepped off the train in this little Italian hamlet, which I'm sure is charming in summer, in order to have dinner with a handful of other kids in the program who were staying there. Their apartment was situated virtually at the highest point in this little town, so we had to weave through the whole village up these steep-ass stone streets, which were slick as hell with all the rain. The actual living space of the apartment was on the second floor, accessed via a stone staircase, even more perilously steep and slick than the streets outside. The place was nice enough for a brief stay, and as would later prove to be my downfall, our host had generously ensured that there were plenty of €1 boxes of wine for each person in our company to get sufficiently lit up. As one who drinks from the bottom shelf almost exclusively, I have encountered many an off-putting adult beverage in my time. Yet truly, I can promise that €1 boxed wine occupies a rung so low on the hierarchical ladder of drinks that I would rather be sober for the rest of eternity than have to drink it again. But oh, how I drank it that night. When dinner time came, we gingerly negotiated the treacherous staircase, which in that moment felt so dangerous that it seemed as if it had been maniacally carved from a grand monolith by some wicked medieval stonecutter. We dined, and despite the excessive volume of the conversations whirring about me, all seemed right with the world for a moment. I felt no inkling of any distress whatsoever. The evening progressed as I had anticipated, and it was already quite late upon our return to the apartment. Entering last through the front door, I calmly and casually went to the bathroom to relieve my bladder. The others, meanwhile, reassembled around the table, fortunately out of view for the terrible series of events about to unfold. Assuming the customary stance over the John, I engaged my pelvic muscles just enough to initiate a stream. And so it happened that within the same moment, and without any warning, my anus let loose a hot, silent stream of liquid shit which proceeded to gracefully cascade down my left leg. Scarcely had I any time to react before clenching my sphincter closed. The shock of what had just happened struck me so suddenly that I was only able to barely mutter, "No!" in the most pathetic mix of despair and confusion. I pulled my pants down to my ankles in order to survey the damage and sit on the seat to evacuate what remained of the evil still lurking in my bowels. What had done this to me? The dark red tint of the soupy feces now covering my lower half betrayed the culprit of this crime perpetrated against me. The Eurobox wine. Hot, sweaty shame then descended over my brow as the obvious question finally hit me. What was I gonna do? It's worth noting at this point that none of the other people in the apartment were my friend, insofar as I could emerge from the bathroom with shit-stained britches and expect anyone to help me without judgment. I was surrounded by nothing more than acquaintances, and as such I had to preserve my image and maintain social decorum. Sitting there, wiping myself clean, I understood that this was a dark secret that I had to keep all to myself. I was now in hostile territory, and only one option remained open to me. I had to get the fuck out of there. Resolute in my decision, I finished cleaning up myself as best as the single roll of toilet paper would allow, washed my hands thoroughly, and cracked the bathroom door just wide enough to peer out. The coast was clear. Everyone was still seated at the table. I dashed from the apartment and wasted no time descending down the stairs into the street below, walking bow-legged so as to avoid smearing the remnants of the wet shit soaked into the denim of my jeans. I succeeded in escaping undetected and continued towards the train station, post-haste, hobbling along with the same awkward gait. I remained mindful of the slick, wet cobblestone beneath my feet, but the perception of danger could do nothing to slow me in my flight. Finally, after descending from the top of the village, I arrived at the secluded confines of the train station, which I found to be abandoned. The building itself essentially consisted of nothing more than 4 cinder block walls and bleak fluorescent lights, with the interior completely exposed to the perpetual wind blowing in from outside. The temperature dipped considerably since we had first arrived, which caused the wind to cut through my flesh even more aggressively. But I didn't care, for I'd already had my return ticket safely in my pocket, and I knew that my deliverance was soon at hand. I breathed a sigh of relief to know that I would soon have to access to a shower in which to wash both my shit-covered pants and myself. 10 minutes of standing in the cold turned into 20 until it finally dawned on me to consult the train schedule. The next train back, the final train of the night, would not arrive for another hour and a half. My heart sank, and so I sat dejectedly on a bench and began to wait. At random intervals, with each gust of wind, the door of the station would swing open and slam into the wall, shattering the eerie solitude that enveloped me. Each of its echoing thuds nudged me closer and closer to the threshold of completely losing my mind as I sat there alone in my own shit, shivering from the constant draft. As I slowly became unhinged, sinking deeper into despair, I began to fantasize about how I could have prevented this dark turn of events. I asked myself, what if you had just decided to stay in the apartment and play it cool, you fool? You could have totally pretended as if there wasn't a wide streak of the color of smoky topaz running the length of your pant leg. Now look at what your rashness has gotten yourself into. I suppose for a moment that maybe I didn't smell like shit anymore. My undercarriage had since dried, so just maybe, had I not been so quick to escape, I could have avoided my present circumstance altogether. These were the voices of the inner demons, and their taunting caused a lump to swell in my throat. By the time these voices began to speak in my head, the boredom of just sitting there in silence had long since taken hold. I concluded then that I was experiencing what I could then only describe as a waking nightmare. And so, in my despair, and for something to do, my gaze eventually turned pleadingly towards the heavens. Like Christ dying on Golgotha, I asked him why he had forsaken me. I prayed honestly for the strength to persevere just long enough to make it back to the hotel. I cradled myself in my own arms and rocked back and forth, all the while whispering words of encouragement to myself. I continued in this manner until the awaited hour drew near, at which point I began to hear voices, audible voices, American voices coming from outside. They were from the girls, returning to the station in order to catch the last train of the night. At last, depleted and tired of hiding, I knew in that moment my dark secret was about to be revealed. Immediately before they entered, I casually crossed my legs and looked up to greet them. They exhibited surprise at seeing me already there, but didn't notice anything amiss. Much to my initial relief, I gave them a weak hello, and one of them, noticing the anguish on my face, already aware of my natural aversion to large groups, surmised that I had become overwhelmed by social anxiety, such that I couldn't tolerate being in the apartment anymore. I instantly seized upon this excuse, which she unknowingly dropped in my lap, and ran with it. In that moment, I became the most brooding, tortured, antisocial weirdo to have ever existed, and they bought it. My secret remained hidden. As the train squealed into the station, I braced myself to overcome the next challenge of actually boarding without them noticing my soiled pants. Feigning courtesy, I allowed them to walk ahead and aboard before me, while the proof of what I had done showed shamefully behind me. And when we arrived to our destination, once again, I, always the dutiful gentleman, allowed the ladies to go first. At last, reaching my hotel room, I peeled my pants and drawers from my body and scrubbed myself clean. Lacking a proper washing machine, I took to my poor clothes with an old toothbrush I had brought along with me and worked hand soap into the fabric until at last no trace of my secret remained. I set them out to dry until morning, at which point I folded them neatly and stuffed them deep into my duffel, burying my secret and putting that dark night finally behind me. And so, if you take only one thing away from this story, let it be this. If you should ever find yourself in any remote corner of the globe, eager for a cheap drink, please, 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 I beg of you, avoid the Euro boxed wine.